27 years ago, a duke with a grudge led a ruthless coup against the Empire of Semilla, killing thousands. He failed. The duke was executed, a terrifyingly powerful sorcerer was imprisoned, and an unwilling princess disappeared. The empire moved on. Now, when Quill, an apprentice scribe, arrives in the capital city, he believes he's on a simple errand for another pompous noble, fetch ancient artifacts from the magical imperial archives. He's always found his apprenticeship to be dull work, but these aren't just any artifacts. These are the instruments of revolution, the banners under which the Duke led his coup. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Himvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Erin M. Empire of Exiles. Empire of Exiles is a 2022 novel set to be released on November the 8th by Uppbeat. It is the first book in the Books of the Usurper by Erin M. This is the 8th novel I have read by Evans, the first 7 being Forgotten Realms ones. Now, this story starts with the Duke Karazi, Rodolfo is his name, has staged a failed coup against Emperor Clement, attempting to put a pretender, Liriana, the apparent daughter of Clement's eldest brothers, children, of course, and they are all thought dead, and he wants to put her on the throne, of course. So Turin, which is Rodolfo's brother, tries to save him some face, though saving him from condemnation is no longer an option. We then fast forward a couple decades, and it starts part 1. It's no longer Clement's 8th year of reigning, but Empress Benedicta's 8th year. Now we have several characters here, which are important as this is very much a character-driven fantasy. So we have Quill, who is a scrivener, who finds himself working for the head archivist. He's parts Mincian, and his real name is Sesquilio, and everyone just calls him Quill. We also have Amadia Gintanis. She is a lot of things. Initially, she reminded me of the anthropologist Maria Gibutas. That was just an initial impression. Of course, I don't actually know anything about Miss Gibutas, so... But anyways, that's the idea I got. And then we also have Richa. I think that's how you say that correctly. He is a police officer of sorts, called a vigilant here. He is kind of crucial to solving a mystery. And then our other main character is Yini Sixal Ul Binturin, who is just, normally called Yini. She is a Orizandi with an affinity for ink, which is odd for her kind. Affinities are the base magic system, kind of. I'll talk about more of that in a second. But ink is odd for Orizandi, as it's actually non-existent outside of her. She's the one and only, the one that has that affinity. She also has horns, which reminds me of Frida and Havilar of Brimstone Angels, which is also by Evans. You should go read those if you haven't already. She also has a third eye, called her dark eye, that is helpful. Of course, thermal rather, it helps her to see in the dark. And from here we learn of little things like the god above and god below, though we don't actually learn much about them. We just learn more about all the religion, which I think is actually done quite well through our characters and their curses and their practices. But anyways, the god above and god below remind me of the Hermetic saying, but the veneration of saints I also thought was cool. There are other races such as the Ashtabari, which are human from the waist up and have tentacles below. There are also more characters, and quite a few are introduced early on, though they kind of play a sideline role for the most part. I already talked about all the main ones. I think all the characters introduced early on, though, got a tiny bit confusing, but many of these characters are friends and or know each other, and so it's a nice dynamic with joking and such that, honestly, that had me laugh out loud a little bit with some chortling or whatever. On a great cast of characters. We also have, the setting is very unique. I'm going to try to make sense of it here for a second, but just to say the fact that it's masterfully built, just to put it masterfully, like honestly, like Ed Greenwood says, Evans knows what she's doing, which is cool to see because you could tell in her Forgotten Realms novel she knew what she was doing, but it wasn't her own world that she was writing in. But it stands out even more so here since this is her own world, it's her own playground. Anyways, it kind of gives me a Mediterranean / Middle Eastern / South or Southeast Asian inspired sort of fantasy with a early modern, late Renaissance sort of feeling as well, since there's wallpaper and gunpowder and stuff. Though again, I shouldn't be too quick to try to find real world analogs rather. There is quite important to the story, a giant salt wall erected 100 years ago that goes around the Imperial Federation of Similan Protectorates, making the country relatively recently formed, which kind of I talked about at the beginning. This coup is in the recent history. The Karazis are originally from a different country, but this Similan country is exactly as the title of the book calls it. It's an empire of exiles. All these people had to come together basically because they were forced to, at least that's how the story goes, and make this hodgepodge of a country. So the old kingdoms outside the wall are in ruins, and a changeling army, they're kind of like shapeshifters, have brought them to ruin. There are 12 of these protectorates. In a way, the place reminds me kind of the New World or the United States, but also kind of like a Holy Roman Empire sort of thing. I think you get the deal. But it's interesting because we have like unity in a way, but we also have this like racial diversity and intermixing with an ancestry, and some of this stuff matters to some people and it doesn't matter to other people. Most of the story takes place in the capital city of Arlabeka, and each piece of the story, because it is divided into parts, 5 parts, I believe, if I remember correctly, maybe it's 6. Each section has a piece of the conversation between Rodolfo and Turin, again, the brothers from the beginning, that is really good for framing the story and the world at large. It's a good peek at the iceberg, as Sanderson or maybe Hemingway might say. And I really enjoy the world building overall. It's a perfect modern epic fantasy example, in my opinion. It gets you used to things in the right amount, mostly connecting you to the characters first. The magic itself is not anything I would call hard magic, which maybe isn't. Well, I guess, I don't know, we still have lots of different types of magic in today's world. I prefer it this way anyways, though. But the magic seems to have these specialists, which have, what I mentioned earlier, affinities for a certain material. These materials generally seem to be man-made. Or no, that's not true. Some seem to be man-made and some seem to be natural, as I believe there are bone ones as well, but there's also things like bronze and ink. I think they act a little differently. We don't get to see a whole bunch of that here, but it's pretty interesting. And they kind of work, or they seem to work kind of like in focus, like a zodiac. I'm not really sure on that as well. So they need special attention during their time, as they can kind of lose control and get lost with this affinity. There are also sorcerers. There's really kind of only one in the story. And how sorcerers are differentiated between people with affinities is a little hard to tell. I think we will get more of that probably in book 2, to be honest. We also have changelings, which are very important as well, and I think they're a nice take on the creature, and they do a fantastic job of adding to the mystery, as this is largely a mystery book, feeding you answers throughout, and the changelings are very important here as it deals with other things like memory as well. So the pacing is pretty good overall. The introduction to part 1 was intriguing, but chapter 1 is rather slow, in my opinion. Chapter 2 introduces more characters in one place, and chapter 2 also ends with quite a bang. Since there is quite a mystery aspect, it keeps the pages turning, though one of 2 are the revelations, I guess, beforehand. But there are a lot of revelations at the same time. I thought it was still fine, as it's more of a reward, even when you do guess them beforehand, and then a bummer, as Evans is writing correctly, in my opinion. Yeah, it doesn't feel lame when you already guessed it and it gets revealed to be right. You feel, good that you had guessed it right. There is also plenty going on here to keep the reader entertained rather. Though there is in some ways very little action, such as combat. So if you were really wanting that, you might be a little disappointed, since people are actually interacting with each other and it's written well. We do get strung along quite nicely though. And I felt many authors would keep you guessing without giving you stuff, but Evans gives us more every chapter and, again, rewards the reader's attentiveness. Really character focus, again, with good politics. Evans, did cut her teeth on Cormyrean politics after all. How the changelings affect things like, like kind of like a ghost over your shoulder. I think it's pretty well executed. The story goes smoothly, has a nice conclusion to its arc, but it is, again, the first in a series, and I must say I am eager for the next one. The stakes are going to get much bigger in that one, though. And again, overall, this is the 8th novel I read by Evans. I think, hopefully, she will get more popular, now not writing Forgotten Realms fiction. I think it's kind of borderline YA, though there is actually a decent amount of cursing in this as well, specifically the F-bombs. And I think this will speak particularly to people with anxiety, since that's kind of what the affinities seem to be based off of. I also think that this kind of gave me urban fantasy vibes, as a lot of the world, again, seemed more modern than a lot of your medieval fantasy, especially your Western European medieval fantasy. And it also seemed kind of like a secondary world urban fantasy because of this hodgepodge of characters, all the food that kind of seemed like really real world, like pumpkins, I think is mentioned, and coffee and several other themes. So, but overall, very well executed, and I'm looking forward to more. I'm glad I actually got the arc of this from NetGalleys. So, but Orbit, November 2022. Catch it when you can.